Thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Gail Bichler. I am the design director of the New York Times Magazine, which is, not surprisingly, part of the New York Times. This is the entrance to our building in Midtown Manhattan. I've been at the Times for a little bit over 10 years, but I was just named the design director in August of 2014, the design director of the magazine. And at that point, we had just gotten a new editor, and we were about to embark on the biggest redesign in the history of the brand, a multi-platform redesign. So I'm going to talk about that redesign, but I'm first just going to give you a little bit of background information about the Times and about the magazine. So this is the first cover of the New York Times Magazine ever published, and it was published in 1896. So it's about 120 years old, so it has a long and distinguished history. And it was created first as a place for literary long-form writing. And it contained the first photographs ever published in the New York Times. And as you can see, it was first published as a broadsheet, so it was a section of the paper. Currently, the magazine has 1.4 million subscribers to the print edition. But we have 4 million readers, so they have some kind of way to figure out what the pass-along rate is. So for example, if a family shares a subscription to the magazine, there may be more than one person reading that subscription. And so they take that into account when they consider how many readers we have. And the magazine is distributed in the Sunday paper, so we do 52 issues per year, which is a lot of issues. And that's just kind of a visual of all the covers that we've made this year. And actually, this is the 1-year anniversary of our redesign. So the first cover up here is actually the cover of our redesign issue, or one of the covers. So in terms of what the magazine, the kind of journalism that we do, we cover a variety of topics. We cover everything from politics to culture to sports, science, health, kind of you name it. We don't tend to cover breaking news, and that's for a few different reasons. We have a pretty big lag time between the time that we send the magazine to print and to when it appears on people's doorsteps on Sundays. It's about 8 days. And we are also kind of by nature defined by our attachment to the Times. So we're always kind of thinking about what we're doing in terms of its relationship to what the paper is doing. And so we don't want to have any overlap with the paper. But we do cover news in a different way. Often we'll have a specific angle on it or some kind of unique access to a story, or maybe we want to run a larger think piece on the cultural or historical ramifications of some certain event. So all this is to just say that we have a very different voice than the paper. And for a typical issue, we would have 3 to 4 different articles that are on all different topics and are kind of curated to work well together as a whole. But every year, we also do 15 special issues, which are, in those issues, basically all of the feature articles are related to a specific theme. And these are really opportunities that our team looks forward to because we get to kind of throw out the old design and really start from scratch. We come up with new typefaces, sometimes we change the grid, we redesign the index of our magazine, and these issues have really become a big part of our brand. So you might wonder why the Times chose to reinvest in the magazine, the print magazine, at this point in time. And basically, well, I think a lot of magazines right now are contracting or going fully digital. A lot of weeklies are going bi-weekly, but for the Times, the magazine is really a legacy product. It is the most read part of the Sunday paper, besides the A1 section. And it's like I said, it's distributed in the Sunday paper, and so often we find that people are buying the paper to get the magazine. And so even in times when the magazine has struggled in terms of advertising, it actually is helping the profitability of the paper. In that way. Also, we had just gotten a new editor, as I mentioned, and he had a new vision for what the magazine should be, which I think is often kind of the best reason to do a redesign. And we wanted to respond to the changing publishing environment. I think for a while there, everyone was kind of doom and gloom on print magazines, and everyone thought, print's dead. I think we've gotten past that stage and realized that print is surviving, journalism is surviving, but that readers are looking to print and digital to do very different things. And we wanted to kind of adapt to that. And then we also wanted to have a more cohesive brand identity across our platforms. And so these are some of the things that we were thinking about as we were doing the redesign. What we hoped to accomplish was to maintain our larger connection to the brand of the Times, but also to define ourselves as a distinct entity. Oftentimes people would come to magazine stories and think they were part of the paper. So we really wanted to kind of make clear our connection, but also to have a more magazine-y presence online. And we also wanted to showcase our strengths. And the strengths of the magazine have always been great writing, great photography, and art. And so, those were things that we were looking to kind of leverage. We also wanted to make it just a more curated, higher-end experience, and a more covetable object, and make something that was really unique to us, and that would age well over time, and something that felt right for the organization, something grown up, something substantial, and something that would be classic, but also modern. So we started with the identity. This is our old logo. It's very recognizable, and we thought that was a good thing. We didn't want to do anything to really radically change it. We just wanted to modernize it and make it more elegant. So we decided to work with Matthew Carter, and we asked him to increase the contrast on the logo and to make it more geometric. So the blue that you see here, that is the new logo. So as you can see, it's much wider and more generously spaced. And at first look, these two logos, they still look pretty similar. You really have to kind of get up close and look at the details in order to really see the changes that we made. So we wanted to make it more streamlined and more angular. We ended up taking out a lot of the curves in some of the letter forms. I think the biggest change was actually in the letter A, as you can see here. And we also decided to introduce a new informal logo for use online and at events and on merchandise. And this was never intended to replace our current logo. It was just meant as a kind of shorthand for the brand and something that would match our tone online, which was more informal. So we decided to make something that was basically using our Twitter handle for the lettering instead of spelling out the whole name. And then we decided to kind of take that informal logo and stack it for use online for our Twitter icon and for podcast icons. So the goal here was to have something just really cohesive. And as you can see, it's been really helpful for products because we're able to actually get the logo to be a lot more punchy. With the old logo, it's just really long, so you might have like a tiny little line instead of having a more graphic logo to look at. And then we were also considering how our logo would have a life outside of the magazine. For example, this is our new video bumper. This goes in front of all of the videos that we put out. Of course, typography is always a big consideration in any redesign. And as in thinking about kind of the current iteration of the magazine when we were trying to figure out what to do with our typography, I was thinking about how in the current magazine, we had kind of started off with this curated group of fonts that all worked well together. And then as we went, we had done some special issues, and we had, occasionally we would decide, oh, I really like that font I used in that special issue. I think I'm going to just make it part of our arsenal of fonts, and we would kind of keep using it. And at the point of the redesign, we were actually using one particular font that we had picked up just through another redesign, or through another special issue. We're using it quite a bit, a font called Circular. And it was actually really overused. So a lot of other magazines were using it. I can remember sitting on the subway and looking up and seeing like an insurance ad with the font. It was just kind of everywhere. It was ubiquitous. And I think in this current climate where people are most often kind of coming to our content online, particularly through social media, it's really important to have something that is particular or unique to your brand. Otherwise, when people get to your site, they really don't even know that the content is coming from you. So we actually decided to commission all of our own fonts. And we wanted to work with Henrik Kubel, who is a Danish designer working out of London. And part of the reason that we picked him was because I had also recently hired Matt Willey, who was working in London and who had done an amazing redesign of The Independent and worked with Henrik and made some really beautiful fonts. So he had a good working relationship with Henrik, and he was actually still in London and could actually kind of get really closely work with him on the fonts as we were working on the redesign in New York. And then also we knew that Henrik was probably the only person crazy enough to take on this job in the time frame that we had, because we had about 4 months to make, in its entirety, to make all of these fonts. And the brief that we gave him was that we wanted modern fonts rooted in history. We wanted 3 distinctly different typefaces that complemented each other. So for example, we didn't want to make a serif font that we then modified to take off the serif to make a sans. And part of the reason that we didn't want to do that was because we just cover such a huge variety of topics that we felt like having a really cohesive kind of family of fonts was not what we wanted. We wanted to have something that had a little more energy and where the fonts worked together, but they weren't completely harmonious. And another thing that we knew was that we wanted to have a condensed font because that's just really helpful in terms of getting scale on typography and having an immediate feel to a lot of the layouts. So what we decided to do was kind of take a look at the real the brand heritage of our typography. And this is Stymie. I think actually this is not necessarily Stymie. This might be Karnak, which is kind of a close relative to Stymie. It's a slab serif that has been around in the magazine, I think at least since the 60s. This particular layout is from the 80s. But we decided to base a slab serif off of this font because we felt that it was so closely associated with the magazine. And we were looking for ways to kind of preserve our heritage while still making something completely new. So, okay. Unfortunately, I didn't realize this, but somehow Stymie is missing here. I wanted to show you a comparison of these letter forms to the condensed forms, which are actually all very similar. But that's actually Helvetica, which looks nothing like the condensed form. And I was also going to show you how we departed quite a bit from many forms, but you'll just have to take my word for it. Yeah, so, and one of the things that we liked about making a condensed slab was that a lot of people were using a condensed sans, so we really felt like this also kind of differentiated us from many of the other magazines that were out there. And so these are the different weights that we had commissioned, and then we also decided, that we wanted 2 much more condensed versions. Sorry, this is kind of embarrassing. Okay. And then we also commissioned a sans font, which I think was the hardest to get right. And Henrik actually told us that this was the brief that we gave him was kind of the nightmare brief that every typographer hopes to avoid. What we asked him for was a modern sans based off of a classic font that was not trendy but unique. And so when we were working on this with him, we would ask him for one change, and he would say, no, that's going to make it look like Futura. We would go in another direction, and he would say, no, now it looks like Gail. So it was a lot of small details really affected the look and feel of it. And I think it's very hard to make a new sans serif that is also like classic. And he did an italic version of it for us as well. And this is our serif display. For this one, we had initially just started working off of a font that Henrik was already working on, kind of a font based off of a classic typeface. But we knew that we could really mold it a lot, and basically Henrik ended up taking a lot of inspiration from the letter forms in our logo and looking at the contrast in those and making something pretty angular. So we had commissioned all these new display fonts to go together. And we really actually also wanted to change our body copy and replace it. But we knew that this was actually going to be the hardest thing to do out of everything, all of the fonts that we had commissioned, because legibility in a magazine like the New York Times Magazine is really paramount. And people often like to, I think, complain when you do a redesign and change something that they love. We knew that if we didn't make the new body font more legible, that we would get a huge amount of complaints. So we undertook this with a lot of care. So we thought the magazine would just feel more cohesive if we were able to make a body font that was an adaptation of the serif display font that we had already made. So the red is the display, and the blue is the body copy. So what we did was we thickened it up, we lessened the contrast between the strokes, and we made the serifs less pointy. Just some examples. And we actually took out a lot of the details that make this font really beautiful at a large scale, but also just make it really active when it's small as body copy. And the biggest move that we made was to change the X height. And that seemed to be the thing that really made the most difference in terms of increasing the legibility. And this change, substituting in this new body copy, had a surprisingly big impact on the whole design in terms of really unifying it. Sometimes I think about the body copy as this kind of like thing in the background, but it really had a lot of impact on what we were doing and really made it kind of come together. So these are all of the fonts that Henrik made for us. It's a suite of 40 fonts, so Henrik did not sleep at all, I think, during the time that we made these. And this is a behind-the-scenes shot just showing some of the type samples that Henrik and Matt were looking at together. As I mentioned, we wanted to use Stymie as a jumping-off point, but we also wanted it to, be its own new modern thing. So they were looking at various influences and drinking coffee and just having a good time with that. And I also wanted to mention behind the scenes, in terms of my own mental state when we were doing this. It was actually pretty terrifying at the start of this process because when you do a redesign, you can pick some fonts and you kind of have that as a starting point, and you know that it's going to be, you can pick a beautiful font and you can make something that looks really good by just setting that type nicely. So here, when we decided to kind of make our own fonts, we started with nothing. And the magazine is really largely typographic. It doesn't have a ton of other design elements. So I had this feeling at the outset that the redesign was really resting largely on the success of these typefaces. And interestingly, I think that in a good way, Matt and I kind of emboldened each other. I was thinking Matt had done all this work on the Independent and commissioned all new fonts, and I think so that was kind of helping me feel okay about it. And I think Matt was, kind of scared to mess with the New York Times magazine's fonts, but the fact that I seemed good with it emboldened him. So in that way, we encouraged each other in a good way, because I think it was the right thing to do. And this is just a picture of some of the markups that we had on the type that Henrik sent. And one thing that one thing that I've kind of learned over time from commissioning fonts is that it's really easy to kind of look at individual characters and pick at them and ask for changes. But often those kind of quirks that you're wanting to take out are the thing that end up giving a font its own character. And so it's really important to work with a typographer whose vision you trust, because we would go back and ask for changes, and Henrik is very accommodating. But to a point, sometimes he would tell us, if you do this, it's really going to, I don't think it's a good idea to do this. There was a lot of back and forth. When we pushed him too far on a certain aspect, he would, kind of push back, which actually was a good thing, I found. So most of the redesign took place in the front of book because the features are designed as one-offs to relate to specific content. And we were thinking a lot about the structure of the whole magazine and the pacing. And we really wanted to have a lot of brand recognizability built into the FOB. And we wanted it to feel kind of more buttoned down and structured so that it would be kind of a foil to what we plan to do in the feature well, where we wanted to be more experimental with the design. And so on the left is our old index, which I actually really liked. And I also wanted to mention that it was an interesting challenge, kind of redesigning something that I felt was also quite well designed at the start, and something that I had been a part of for a long time. Like in terms of, I had actually worked on these layouts and been incredibly familiar with the original design. But so one of the things that we did was really kind of strip down the new design. We wanted to give it a more like book-like feeling, make it feel more literary. So we made the index very chart-like and very easy to use. And this is the second page of the index. We also added a masthead. The magazine had actually never had a masthead. So there was a sense that this magazine was being made, but not a sense of who made it. And we added contributors as well. This is the opening page to the magazine. On the left, again, is the old design, and on the right is the new. And they are very different. We really wanted to make a statement here about being a literary magazine. We wanted to foreground the text. And our editor had this nice idea that he wanted you to come to this page and really slow down the pace and be drawn in with large typography. So we had a number of designs where we had used imagery, but this ended up just feeling like the right choice. And we decided to put a conceptual image on the second page. We introduced 4 rotating columns called On Nature, On Photography, On Clothing, and On Money. And these were really topics that we were using as a lens through which to examine contemporary culture. So for these columns, they all had a similar structure. We really wanted the columns to have their own identity based on the way that we commissioned art for each column. And I wanted to point out here that we introduced a new kind of display that was inspired by the descriptive headlines that we were using online. So often, for pieces in the magazine, we would have a head that you could come to in the magazine, and you would get a deck with it. So it wouldn't matter that the head was a little bit abstract, or it didn't matter that it was kind of hard to understand just from looking at the head what the piece would be about. So we were often kind of rewriting these things so that for online, you would see a headline and you would more understand what you were going to get if you clicked on that headline. So here we decided to forego a traditional head and deck structure and just have one kind of inviting sentence to lead you in. We also introduced more different kinds of writing. So, and these were really aimed at kind of entertainment. So this is a poem that we introduced, a weekly poem. And this is also another way that we felt we were differentiating ourselves from the paper. We introduced a comics page as well. And this is a column called Letter of Recommendation, which is really a place for writers to enthuse about a variety of things, just to kind of make an argument for something that they love. And that has ranged quite a bit from things like LaCroix sparkling water to Turner Classic Movies to the fanny pack. And there's a sidebar here that we do that's called tip, and it's basically on something that it's usually on something that you would likely never need to do. A tip on things like how to fight fires from a plane, or how to cry on command, how to survive a stampede. And it's kind of a humorous thing because our magazine doesn't really do service, so it's just a humorous nod to service. We revived an old column called Domains that we've done for quite a while, and that was a column that showcased a notable person's home. And the old column really relied heavily on the interview, so we found that we were often working with people who were interesting, but their space wasn't necessarily so interesting. So in the new version, we really focused on curating it more, finding interesting people who also had great taste. And we really wanted to make the column more visual and a little bit more voyeuristic. We also kept our diagnosis column, which is a popular column in the magazine about a medical mystery. And over the years, we had different approaches for art for that column that varied in their success. But we would often find that, for example, on the left is the old column, and we would often find that we were making kind of pictures of sick people, which were really not that appealing. So in this kind of with this new approach to the art, we wanted to make something that was more graphic and more conceptual. For our food column, again, the old design on the left and the new on the right, we wanted to, again, focus on the kind of great photography that we have. So instead of kind of working on integrating the type with the photo, we focused on just getting a really great photography for the food page and having that be self-contained. We kept our old ethicist column, but we changed the format for that quite a bit. And this first launched as a podcast. In the original column, it was basically questions asked by readers that were answered by an ethicist. And in the new column, we had 3 different ethicists with very differing viewpoints discussing the nuances of these questions. And then an edited transcript appeared in the magazine. We found actually that people did not really want to know about all the nuances of these questions. They really just kind of wanted an answer from an ethicist. So we recently changed that back to a more authoritative answer to these questions. And we also kept our lives column, which is a column that was about true personal stories. And that was previously a column where writers submitted pieces and our staff curated it. So we made a change to make this an as told to piece. And the idea behind that was that we really wanted to get more stories that were more international and more diverse and make use of our reporters that were stationed around the world to get stories that had been told to them. So for example, the old column is on the left, and that's a story about a woman living in Brooklyn who was an assistant to a feminist activist. And the new story on the right is about an encounter with a gang member on a bus in El Salvador. So it really made a pretty big difference in the kind of stories that we were able to tell. And also, as you can see, we used a bigger art treatment. Covers are a big thing that you consider when you're doing a redesign. And I'm just going to take this opportunity, because it's kind of fun to look at old covers, to show you a bunch of old covers of the magazine. And we've had a lot of great ones. But keep your eye on the logo, because that's one of the things that we were looking at in terms of figuring out what we were going to do for the new design. So this is a cover from 1936, and then the logo stacked. One from 1942, one from 1950, 1969, 1973, 1991, 1993, and this is a kind of favorite cover of mine. I think it's something that was a really brave thing to publish at the time, and would be a brave thing to publish now, something that I think it distinguishes us in terms of the kinds of things that we will publish. 2 2001 cover on 9/11. I believe this is 2011, no, 2007. And then one of the more recent kind of typical covers. A lot of the covers that I was showing you were covers for special issues. A lot of them really make use of the non-newsstand status that we have, which is a real luxury. We don't have to kind of put a lot of lines on our covers because we don't have to sell them on a newsstand. People are just going to get it in the paper, and so we're able to do a lot of things with our covers that other people aren't able to do. But as the magazine kind of struggled in current times and got a little bit thinner, we often were kind of wanting people to know, like, look, we have a lot of stories in here, so we added, more lines. And so that was, the kind of current state of things. And this is one of the early covers that I did with our new editor. And this was before the redesign. So kind of initially when he got there, we started really pursuing a slightly different cover strategy, really making use of our non-newsstand status, taking into account how a lot of readers were first encountering our covers, which was often online or through social media, where something much more stripped down tends to read a little better. And so here, this is a cover for a child-themed food issue, and we wanted it to really impart a sense of joy and playfulness. This is an illustration by Christoph Niemann. And so we were experimenting with covering the logo, kind of thinking about that recognizability factor. How much can we obscure and still be recognizable, and that type of thing. Another early cover before the redesign, where we were again kind of playing with what we can do in terms of changing the look of the magazine. And this was a story on a group providing abortions to women who didn't have access to them, and they were doing that by sending pills through the mail. So we really wanted to make the magazine almost feel like a package, and to give the readers that kind of emotional feeling that you get when you get a package. So we tried to make the cover look very object-like. Here's an unusual celebrity cover that we did for our culture issue, again, still before the redesign. But pursuing that new idea of what a cover should be. And the cover subject was Lena Dunham, who is usually seen as more of a pop culture icon. But for our culture issue, we wanted her to embody high art. And I feel like this is a cover that could have gone disastrously wrong, just the idea. But we hired Victoria Diehl, who is a pretty amazing fine artist who had never done a magazine cover before, and she was making these very ethereal images that combined, that were mostly kind of sculpture, but had like human elements integrated in a very beautiful way. And she made this portrait of Dunham that was a kind of composite of her and a statue. Another cover for a special issue on the role of failure and innovation. So this was just a failed cover attempt of our own. So this is the first cover of our redesign issue. And it had a global theme. And as you can see, we decided to go with the centered logo. We just thought it was more authoritative, so went back to that. For the redesign, we actually had we commissioned 4 different artists to make covers. And they were all on the same issues, just printed on subsequent pages. And so these are some covers that we've made since the redesign. And you can kind of see that we are still kind of pursuing this very stripped down graphic quality. This is a cover on voting rights and how Republicans had deliberately undone one of the cornerstones of American democracy. A recent culture cover. And this doesn't need a line and it doesn't need a description either. So you might be wondering what we kept the same with all these changes. The crossword puzzles. That was something that we felt if we changed, we might be run out of the times. When our editor kind of put out a letter about our redesign. He initially just said, "We didn't change the crossword puzzles. Put down your pitchforks." We also did not change the full body portrait in our talk column. In a previous redesign, we had changed that. We had decided that we were tired of looking at it and we wanted to do a head portrait. What we actually changed it to was 2 pictures, 2 headshots of the person with different expressions. And we got so many complaints that we actually ended up having to change it back. Apparently, people really want to see what shoes people are wearing. So we did not mess with that. We learned our lessons. We kept it here. But also, I wanted to mention that we really tried to keep the spirit of the magazine and looked at preserving the things that our readers liked most. And those kind of things were like using different kinds of artists, really discovering new talent along with using established artists, cross-assigning in terms of photography. We have a really amazing photo department and a fantastic photo editor, Kathy Ryan, who is really known for kind of cross-assigning photography. So she will sometimes hire like a fashion photographer to shoot a landscape. We still do a lot of those kinds of things. And we also kept a conceptual approach to art, a use of liberal white space, and a really ambitious approach to our special issues. So our relaunch issue was very successful in terms of advertising. It was 224 pages. It was the largest issue of the magazine ever produced. And now I'm going to show you I'm going to play a little clip just showing you a lot of the pages that we've created over the past year since we redesigned. So I've talked about this being a multi-platform redesign, but I haven't really shown a lot of digital stuff. So I'd like to show you just an example of a translation of our travel theme Voyages issue from print to web. This is a translation in some ways, but we've also done a lot of kind of thinking about digital as a separate entity, and a lot of our digital packages function completely differently than the print versions of them. So our travel-themed Voyages issue was a kind of unique issue for us. We approached a number of photographers, and we asked them if there was a particular voyage that they had always wanted to take. And those pitches ended up being a starting point for 6 incredibly varied photo essays. So for example, Glenna Gordon took a train ride through Nigeria. George Steinmetz took an aerial voyage over the world's largest waterfall in Venezuela. And the cover image is an image by Alex Soth, and it's a self-portrait of him, a reflection of him in his hotel room in Tokyo, floating above the city, doing what we often do, which is being absorbed in his telephone rather than looking at the things outside. This is the opener to the package, and the font used here was one created specifically by Matt for this issue. So it's a bespoke font. Just a list of the voyages. And then the design of the features here was really deliberately stripped down and meant to be a shell for the photography. The voyages were just indicated with a large number and a statement of intent and no header deck. And the idea here was to really let the imagery stand on its own rather than framing it editorially like we would normally do. This one is for Alex Soth's voyage to a hotel room in Tokyo, where he decided to, instead of going outside, order things in, like insect sushi and various types of people and services. So he actually never left the hotel room for his voyage. And here's the online presentation. So I just wanted to mention this is, although this is a special issue, there are some things about it that are kind of typical in the way that we've approached online. That the imagery is full bleed and very immersive. Even though we used a special font for the issue, we actually used our brand fonts for this package because people would be, again, approaching it often through social media, and we wanted it to be branded. And this opening footage was shot by a drone flying overhead. And then you could scroll down and see basically the entire issue in one long scroll. Also, we're really interested in alternate forms of storytelling. And this year we launched a virtual reality platform. And this is a picture of people at a launch party for one of the films using the virtual reality headsets and doing a communal viewing of one of our films. So I mentioned in order to release the film, we launched a whole virtual reality platform, which was a major project within the Times involving a large number of groups. Our tech team, product development, marketing, everyone kind of got involved. But we made a little film to kind of explain to our readers what was coming, and a little animation, I'll show you that now. So the interesting thing about doing this, other people have tried experiments in virtual reality, was basically that we partnered with Google to distribute 1.4 million cardboard viewers to our subscribers. So other people had kind of experimented in the media, but this project that we did was really a watershed moment for virtual reality because for the first time, it was available to the public in mass. So when people went out in the morning and got their Sunday paper, they got a virtual reality headset. And I think previously people thought a lot about this medium as something for gamers, and not as a vehicle for serious journalism. And so I think this was a really kind of interesting experiment that we did. And one of the first films that we released was something called The Displaced. And it was a film that followed 3 children displaced by war, one from the Ukraine, one from South Sudan, and one from Lebanon. And one thing that we found with the virtual reality versus a regular film was that the virtual reality was really a good way to get people to empathize. When you're looking at a film on your computer, you can have a kind of distance from it, but when you are looking at a virtual reality film, you really feel like you're there. So you might be visiting, with a child, their bombed out school building. And it really creates a pretty amazing sense of, being there and really, feeling it. And that became apparent through this film. And now I'm going to end with showing our most ambitious project of the year that I think used all of our platforms in really unique ways. In September 2015, we published a themed issue on walking in New York. And for the cover of the issue, we commissioned a French artist named JR, who makes large-scale painting in large-scale pastings in urban areas. And we commissioned him to paste down a walking figure on the Flatiron Plaza in Manhattan. And he started at 4 a.m. pasting down the image. He pasted down 62 strips of paper to make a 150-foot image. And the idea was that he would then fly overhead in a helicopter and shoot it with people wandering over it. And the image was so big that a lot of the people kind of walking over the image didn't really realize what they were walking on. They were just seeing texture. And we thought this was a very poetic notion. And it was a good intersection between work that JR was already doing. He does a lot of work on immigrants. So the person that he chose to photograph and paste down was an immigrant who he felt kind of symbolized the many immigrants that walk the city and are kind of invisible. So at 9 o'clock, we came in with a power washer and got rid of the whole thing. So it was less than a day. And here's some images that just show what it was like when we pasted this down on the ground. This is a shot of our photo director, Kathy Ryan, with JR. And we also made a virtual reality film of the making of this cover, which allowed the viewer to have the experience of kind of hanging over the side of the helicopter with JR. He's strapped in there. And you could look around the city. This is kind of the money shot, but you kind of started off in JR's studio. He's very charming. You get to hear him talk about his ideas for the cover. You get to see how the image was pasted down. And then also even take a moped ride with him to the helipad. And then you get to kind of be up in the helicopter. And obviously, this is not the virtual reality film, but it's a 360 experience that's designed for desktop. This is the cover that he shot. And this is the interior of the print magazine. Again, it was another bespoke font that Matt actually drew specifically for the issue. This was a photo essay by Lee Friedlander, shot on the streets of New York. It's just some classic street photography, mostly about how people use their cell phones when they're walking. A photo essay on shoe shiners' hands. A story on how animals travel the city. And in addition to the cover, JR, he shot a number of portraits for the inside of the magazine with immigrants holding oversized cutouts of themselves and kind of walking the streets with those. And we liked the idea of having the public interact with JR's art, so we had him, the night before the issue went live online, we had him paste 14 of those images on walls all over New York City, so within each of the 5 boroughs. And we didn't disclose the locations of these things, and then people had to go out and find them. This is a posting that JR made on Instagram, kind of letting people know that we were doing this and that we would be posting things on our Instagram. And then people really had a lot of fun going out and finding these things and interacting with them in the city. And then I'm going to show you our presentation online. I included this page here that shows the paper's homepage, just so you can really have a sense of how entering the magazine differs from the paper experience. So it becomes much more immersive when you get to the magazine. And for this, basically, we had this page that included all the walks that were talked about in the issue, but we also allowed readers to submit their own walks, kind of personal stories that they had about walks in New York, and our staff, our editors, curated that and put some of those up. And for each of the walks, even the ones that were reader submitted, you could go online and have a panoramic view of the starting point of the walk. And then also you can get a close-up view of what the walk is. We had this map for people to check that out. And that's it.
Thank you so much for this brilliant talk, for this wonderful work. There are so many inspirations in the thing what you are doing, and it started with words. One word I love is power washer.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit jealous that you have a photo director,
Yeah.
for example,
Yeah.
or that you can make a font especially for only one issue.
Well, that's basically because we have a very talented designer who is making it. Yeah.
There are two questions out of the audience. The one is, how big is your team? Are there freelancers, or all the people are always there? And how you work this out?
Our team, the art department is 6 people, including myself. We also have a digital designer. That's a new addition that we recently got, literally within the past 6 months. But it's myself, and then Matt, who's the art director. We have a deputy art director, and 3 designers. And then, but we're part of a much larger group. Obviously, the magazine as a whole is 50 people.
50 people
Yes.
who are doing this design.
No.
No.
There are 6 people doing design,
Okay.
and we have a great photo department, editors. We have
The
fact
journalists
checkers.
and the designers and the photo editors, and they are all together 50.
Yes, that's all together, the entire magazine. And
Okay.
but even with that, we make use of a lot of freelancers in my own department. I'm often bringing in freelance designers, and in terms of, a lot of the writing comes from outside, and the editors are shaping it internally.
There's another question, because we are a little bit focused in this conference on the relation, the interaction between journalists and designers. How you work out a new title and new idea for the magazine?
It's very collaborative. That's one of the things that I really love about being at the New York Times. The content is amazing, and I get to be involved in it at the start. We have ideas meetings, which are kind of one of my favorite things to attend, where people propose different ideas, and it's encouraged for people to kind of come with like an elevator pitch that isn't necessarily completely thought out, because somebody will throw out an idea, and then our editor will say, well, the interesting part of that is maybe this, and so it's really like a conversation, and I'm also welcome to contribute story ideas.
Okay, good.
In fact, a lot of our ideas often will come from photo editors who are pitching a visual story, and then they'll say, there's maybe more of a story, a written story that could go with that as well. So it's a very close pairing, even down to the end, where we have a really fantastic editor, Jake Silverstein, who oftentimes will adjust his cover language to work with a cover that he thinks is good visually. So it's extremely close collaboration.
Wonderful. And there's one special question. What was the song in the first video?
Well, you know what? I actually don't know what it is. Matt put it on there, and I really liked it, so we left it. But I think it was basically
You can give it to me and I will post it, okay?
Okay, yeah. I think it's
Bit
a
late.
DJ that combines like old and new. So
Okay. Thank you so much for this talk.
thank you.